2. Welcome to Purple Coach Conversations with Anne and Tanya, myself. Our goal is to normalize, educate, and inspire conversations around diversity and inclusion. We're both coaches, mothers, and entrepreneurs. We are not diversity experts, but we aim to have conversations with people that will have something interesting and unique to say about their journey and experience in diversity and inclusion.
So today we have a really special guest with us, and I'm really privileged to introduce Dr. Jonathan Ashong-Lamptey. He's a global recognized authority on diversity and inclusion in the workplace, advising global businesses and government policy makers while contributing to international research projects. He has a PhD from the London School of Economics, and is the host of The Element of Inclusion, which is a weekly podcast, and he also has a monthly book club. So Jonathan, welcome very much to Purple Coach Conversations. We would love to hear your story, and if you can introduce yourself first of all, please, and tell us a little bit more about you.
And Tanya, thank you very much for having me here. Thanks for inviting me. I love the way you introduced me. Everyone calls me Dr. Jonathan. Can you see why? It sounds a bit long, doesn't it, when you're saying it? So people normally call me Dr. Jonathan, even when to be honest, my mum calls me Dr. Jonathan. People in my family call me that. Yeah, they love it. But to introduce myself again, it was such a great introduction, but I'm Dr. Jonathan. I work with organizations to make them inclusive. I'm the founder of an organization called The Element of Inclusion, and we do research, training, consulting. We do things like that, but I'm really proud of the podcast, where every week we inform and educate using applied research and thought leadership. I'm constantly talking about my PhD. I use it all the time in our work, when I'm working with clients, on the podcast as well. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that a little bit later. But do you know what's really interesting? Like right now, at the time this is being recorded, Joe Biden has just become president of the United States, and Kamala Harris is now vice president of the United States. And what's interesting for me in terms of diversity and inclusion, my own journey started at the Obama inauguration. So I was at the Obama inauguration in January 2009, and it was so cold, I can tell you. It was a historic moment. It was so cold, but I felt so proud. I was there with a couple of friends. It really meant a lot to us. That historic moment. So it's quite funny to be talking about this several years later at the time of another inauguration.
What a privilege that must have been.
Yeah, I felt really lucky to be there. The funny thing is that I had a friend, so it's a funny story, a friend of mine, his family's Irish American, and they always celebrate Thanksgiving in London, and I normally go along. He's got an aunt who lived in Washington, D.C., and this was in 2008. And we were like, oh, wow, guess what? You know, because Obama just won the election. Wow, it's going to be amazing, the inauguration. I'd love to go to that. And she says, yeah, you should come along. It's like, yeah, okay. Just, someone just being polite. Yeah. And I spoke to my friend and I said to him, you know what your aunt said? Like, was she serious? And he says, yeah, she said it. And so we followed up and then we ended up going. And she lived like downtown.
Wow.
So it was amazing. It was amazing, really inspiring. It meant a lot to me. And that started me on my inclusion journey, because at the time I was working as a chartered accountant, and every month you get a magazine called Accountancy Magazine. You don't get it now, but it's part of your professional subscription. And this month it was talking about Obama, and it was talking about the lack of Black accountants in the UK. And I thought that was really interesting at the time, being a Black chartered accountant. And it was saying that there's a lack of Black accountants, no one knows why. And there was a person called, he's now Dr. Anton Lewis, who went on to be a mentor of mine. And he was talking about this, and he was doing research in this area. I ended up being part of his study. And it also led me on my own journey to explore this, because I contacted the big four professional service firms. I contacted my own professional body. No one knew or understand the challenges. Like they all thought I was a journalist. They wanted to ignore me. And it started me on this path to where I am now, doing everything around diversity and inclusion. So it's all quite nice and neatly
Wow.
tied up.
Wow.
The
What a
inauguration.
journey. It's interesting how how it's come to be as well, like just the whole interconnection. And you say, with the Obama, and I think a lot of people can identify, a lot of not just Black people or people of color, but I think anyone who wanted to see change remembers where they were when Obama got elected as the president. It was such a historic moment.
It was a beautiful inauguration, and the poem also that was recited, the Obamas were very much present as well. So it was so inspiring, and they were so classy. I mean, when I saw them, I was like, wow, we missed them so much.
Class act, right?
Yeah.
Class
really,
act.
class. We were missing this word, I think, as well. So yes, and I wanted to also take this opportunity to thank you so much, because Purple Coach Conversation was inspired also by the work that you're doing. And we've been in touch, right, for quite some time, since June this last year. And you gave us advice on how to start our journey, because we did some recordings, Anne and I, and then we spoke about having guests, and you gave us tips and advice. So we really want to thank you for having taken the time to teach us what you've learned all these years around diversity, inclusion, and the hurdles, the positive, the negatives, everything, right, about that. And I think, Anne, you had a question around Jonathan's personality and how he's
Yes. So, as I'm
Sounds
sure
like a
you
scary question coming up.
it's just a question I think be interesting for the viewers to hear, because when we started this journey of talking about inclusivity, diversity, race, racism, all those other words that make some people a bit like backs up or can make people go on the defense, we realized that you've got to have a bit of a thick skin in this game, or when you talk about race in general. But you've kind of mastered the skill of that thick skin and not really paying attention to the haters and the naysayers and the critics, but in a way that is, I think, is empowered you really in your journey. And I'm just wondering, from your experience, how you've kind of built that thick skin around everything, because I'm sure you must have had criticism and haters and all of that along your journey, for sure.
Don't we all, right? Don't we all? But
Yeah.
first off, thank you for saying those kind things. I think you've got a voice. Purple Conversations, you've got a voice. You want people to hear what you have to say, and you want to share knowledge, experience, and expertise. And so I think a podcast is one of many ways that you can do that. I think anyone who has a voice, a podcast is an excellent opportunity. And for me, when I started the podcast, I started it on an iPhone. I didn't, and when I say that, literally, I was talking into it, making all these mistakes. Now I leave half of the mistakes in the podcast, by the way, but I was really I wanted to share, because I was in a situation where I'd finished my PhD. I felt like I've got all this knowledge, I've got all this expertise. And then in London in particular, when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, what it looked like to me was a closed shop. People were talking about inclusion, but it didn't seem very inclusive. My perception was that, like I said, I just wanted to share. Who can I speak to? I've got all this knowledge. Like, is it even useful? I didn't even know how to package it. And I felt, you go to particular events, if you get invited, I wasn't getting invited to events, all of this type of stuff. So I was thinking, how can I just make an impact and share? Because I knew I didn't want to go down the academic route, or else I would have done that. I wanted to kind of come back into the workplace and share what I knew. And so I thought a podcast would be a low cost, easy way for me to share. So show, not tell, right? I can tell you, oh, I know this, I know that. But if I show you every single week, you are certain. You don't need to take my word for it. So it was a great way to show, not tell. And I think, just like you said about developing a thick skin, I tried to be really clear about what I wanted to achieve. So you hear me say at the beginning of each of my shows, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people like you to make your workplace inclusive. Now, it all sounds cheesy, but I actually believe that. That is my genuine intention. And I think we spoke about this before, but with the podcast, I didn't care how many people were listening to it. I just thought it, and I wasn't trying to monetize it. There's no adverts. I did have guests, but I wasn't trying to get a special guest each and every week to show how popular I was. In fact, some of my guests were people who no one really knew, but they had something really important and valuable to say. And so with that in mind, for the first 2 years, I didn't even check the numbers on who listened to the podcast. I was just committed to actually sharing what I knew. And I chose a particular style that was more conversational. I wasn't trying to patronize people, but I'd also call out things that we saw. So I'd say, like, have you ever noticed that, because I've got a pet hate of panel events, right? I don't think they're always as effective as they can be unless they're part of an ongoing program of change. So I would say things like, hey, have you ever noticed that when you go to panel events, it's always people who are following a script. It's always people who have been pre-prepared. And we've all been at an event and we've seen someone, they're talking about, oh, great, we believe in diversity and inclusion. If you go 10 minutes before, you see them learning a script. This may be, I'm tongue-tied here, they may even be getting coached. So it's like, oh, so do you really believe that? If I came and spoke to you next week, would you be saying that? And so I try to be authentic to the, people say bring your whole self to work. I was focused on bringing my best self. So when I'm on the podcast, when I'm sharing it, it is my thoughts, it is my opinions, it's my beliefs, but I want to do it in a way that has meaning and value to you. So I was always focused on you and not me, and that made a huge difference.
Yes,
absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, go on, Tanya.
No, just it's very much, as coaches, it's very much what we're trying to teach our clients in some way, not really focusing on the results straight away, because the evidence doesn't come straight away. Unless you go viral and on a topic, but that's very rare, right? But you gotta do the work. You gotta keep the passion and the love in mind, because it's all about love, right? The love for what you're doing. And with that in mind, if you take one step after the other without wanting to look for the evidence. But I love this 2-year thing, because we're going to do that with Anne as well, right? We're not going to check for any evidence, any likes for the next 2 years, but we keep continuing our mission and our journey, which is to talk to people and increase our networking and making sure that we learn and we develop ourselves and others and teach and explain what we're doing.
I think that's a great point, Tanya. And also just provide something that people get value from. So if they do that, you don't need 100 likes, because what if no one likes it? What if you put it out there, it's really good, but no one likes it?
Sure.
That would be quite disappointing. But if it's valuable, someone will like it later. So something else I'll share with you. So I would say a year ago, I had at least 50 episodes of the show that had 0 listens, nothing, right? So that means I've made a podcast, at least 50 is a year, by the way, right?
Yes, it's true.
I've done 50 episodes that had 0 listens. I was like, okay. Now I checked the other day, so I'm not going to throw numbers out, but it's increased dramatically, right? So, but what I will say is every single episode of the show has been listened to like at least 1,000 times. Now, here's the thing. So here's the thing. With that in mind, were those shows, did they just get good now? No, right? People like them now. People have discovered them now, but the value was always there. So if you create something that's valuable, people are going to discover it sooner rather than later. And the bar is so low. Sometimes it feels as if there's a lot of information. And this is definitely something that would be useful for your listeners and your viewers.
Yeah.
The bar is so low for meaningful quality content. A lot of corporate organizations, a lot of people are speaking in just platitudes. You know, they're not saying anything that you can act on. And one of the things that I think is really useful, if as leaders, is to give people something to do, something meaningful based on your expertise, and invite them to grow, give them permission to grow, give them permission to explore. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, so glad to see those numbers. Sorry, and so glad to hear those numbers. And of course, I'm sure there's a link with George Floyd and everything. So just trying to understand what. So aside from the numbers of the podcast that have increased in your day-to-day in your job, what have you seen with organizations? What have you seen changing with organizations before and now after George Floyd?
So let's take a trip back a year ago, right? So January 2020, Brexit seemed like a big deal, didn't it? Yeah? It seemed like a big deal. So for me, what people were talking about and concerned about was Brexit, organizations. And in particular, I was interested in the idea of because particularly in London, people were really upset. People who you might not have thought of as being from minority ethnic groups were starting to consider themselves to be from minority ethnic groups. So, you know, here in the UK, we say BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic. Regardless of what you think of that term, it's a term that's used. And some people, by virtue of Brexit, started to think, well, hold on, I'm French, I'm Spanish, I'm Italian. Am I in a minority group? Am I welcome in this country? So the idea and the concept of what minority meant was really being explored and discussed. Then we had the pandemic.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's
very interesting. I've never heard of that. Sorry to interrupt. I've never heard of it that way, because there's always, for me, been an assumption that white people do not belong into this group. You're talking about or minority group in any way, and I'm sure there's quite a few people out there that share this way of thinking. So it's very interesting that the whole Brexit challenged that idea.
Yeah, well, Anne, I was speaking to people who, let's say it's someone who's Italian or Spanish, and they're saying, well, we don't feel we belong here. Like they took Brexit personally, like this society rejecting me. And I'm thinking, this sounds exactly what I hear when I'm speaking with people who are Black, Asian, you know, in my research. It's like, oh, okay, isn't that interesting? So there's this shared experience or not. And so just having that conversation was quite interesting. Then we had the pandemic. And so what I noticed was everyone wanted to cut budgets, right? So the idea about diversity and inclusion, it didn't seem that relevant anymore. And everyone had a reason to say, we're not going to do this. Now, here's the other thing. It's an unpopular opinion, but I think it's true, is a lot of diversity and inclusion, the way it's done is very events driven. We're going to do an event. We're going to have some sort of celebration or a party. Now, in a society where we can't meet up, we can't have events, it's easy to cut diversity and inclusion, isn't it? I'm not a fan of course you need to have events from time to time, but I think a lot of the work can be done without having events as your primary strategy. And so with that in mind, diversity and inclusion fell off. And a lot of organizations realized that they had events managers instead of diversity and inclusion leaders. It was Roy Ann Ned who said that to me first, made me laugh when she said that. And so that was really interesting. So I was like, okay, so now what's happening? Then what we looked at in the media was you saw lots of diversity and inclusion leaders writing articles, or everyone was saying it's still important. And it felt, and we were talking about this earlier, and you talked about this idea about energy. Yes. And this desperate energy. It felt as if people are saying diversity and inclusion is important. Let's have a look who the author is. Oh, you're a diversity and inclusion consultant. So of course you are saying it's important. Like, let's hear about it from other people. No one really wanted to talk about that. So I felt that it fell off the radar. It was less of a priority. Then George Floyd and others as well. Yes. And others, which frankly, I think in any other year, that happens. Black men being killed by the police that's a routine thing in life. However, given the concern, everyone was at home, and it felt as if it just, and obviously the angst and tension of the pandemic, it felt as if everyone's attention was, well, it was there. Everyone was looking at their screens, and it went viral, and we saw what happened. Then there was this emotive response from individuals, and then organizations felt under pressure. They felt under pressure to respond. They felt under pressure to do something. And then they realized they didn't have the skills. A lot of their diversity and inclusion leaders, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, certainly in the UK, over the past 3-4 years, it's always been about gender. No one was really talking about race in any meaningful way. Very few organizations. They realized they didn't have the tools. They didn't know what to do. And so then you started to see a swing. So when from all of a sudden no one's interested, now everyone's interested. Everyone's making claims. They're saying they're anti-racist. Racism is abhorrent. And a lot of them threw money at the situation as well. So these are some of the things that I saw last year in terms of a cycle. And now people are still very concerned, but we're in 2021. This week, at the time this was being recorded, was Martin Luther King's birthday, which is a national holiday in the US. Now we've just had the inauguration we've just discussed.
Yes.
In February in the US, and this sounds very US focused, but I know you've got a global audience, is Black History Month in the US.
Yeah.
So all of these things, we're still focusing on race in particular and the impact of that. And then May, June, a lot of us are going to be asking questions. It's a year on. What's happened?
Yep.
What has happened? Everyone who said you were anti-racist, what are the things that have changed in the year that you made that claim, that you had your black square, that you did this, you did that? What's happened? And so it's going to be interesting to see what that looks like. I think we're going to see who was really doing the work and who wasn't.
And I think that's a really good point where we talk, and we say this with Tanya as well. And when we started Purple Coat Conversations is, okay, what's the intention of this? What are we trying to set out here? And one of our main intentions was to keep the conversation going, keep trying to make that change. Because it's and exactly to your point, Jonathan, it's like it became trendy because we all sat at home, global pandemic, people had the time to pay attention to what was happening and take part in the protest, to stand up for it was wrong and we're not going to take it anymore. But I wonder if it would have been to that scale, if we were not in a global pandemic and time had not stood still, whether it would have blown up to the scale that it did last year. Because as you say, it's not the first time. It's happened so many times. Every single year, we've had, a Black Lives Matter discussions within a lot, I think more so within the Black community about, we can't keep getting murdered like this and there's no consequences, nothing happens. And, as much as I think we all appreciate that everyone kind of got involved last year as well, and there's a bit of me that wonders if it would have been to that scale were it not for COVID and the effects of time standing still for us. It is what it is. It helped the cause, which is fantastic, and it's great. But, as to your point, then what? 1 year later, where are we? From a personal perspective, as individuals, all of you put the black square and had the hashtags and organizations. Where are you? How has that progressed 1 year later?
And I think, I don't know if you agree, but I think that what we have to take away from this is that eventually you'll see a differentiation of leadership even more. So you'll have the leaders that will have adopted certain behaviors that have proven effective and shown a result, and actually the diverse employees feel more accepted and valued and understood and performing better, and those we will see results long term. And then you'll have other type of leaders who will have just put that black square on the day, but will not have done the work, or will have just done the token work and moved on, which is I think the two kind of leaders that we're going to see. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like I said earlier about show not tell, right?
Mhm.
It's quite easy to tell and say, and this performative aspect of it. So we're going to perform. We're going to say, yeah, racism is terrible. But if you look at what the organizations did, they all made statements. Racism is abhorrent. There's no place for it. Then a lot of them outsourced the problem. So they said, if we see racism, we will, one will call it out, two, it's unacceptable. We will therefore eliminate it and address it. But the reality is most racism, and it depends how you conceptualize racism, but it's mainly, if we're talking about discrimination, most of that is covert anyway. There's not a lot of overt discrimination in the workplace. I'm not saying there isn't, but if you look at the research, if you look at people's experiences, it tends to be covert. So to say that you're going to, when you see it, the chances are you're not going to see it. So that's a big issue. The performance is a challenge because, like you said, black squares, we're going to make a statement. We've all done some listening. A lot of organizations did that. They said they were listening, but we need action. And even if you think about, if you think about anti-racism as a principle, I've got the book here. So let me show you this. This book here, I reviewed it on my book club. How to be an anti-racist, right? In this book, there's a very binary description of anti-racism. To be an anti-racist is proactive. So if you're doing nothing, if you're inactive, right? Your inaction makes you racist, according to this book. That's a pretty strong position. So when you're saying you're anti-racist, do you even know what that means? I think a lot of leaders don't know what that means. And so they're making commitments they don't understand, and people are going to remember. And Black Lives Matter as well. They are going to remember. And it's worth noting. Have you noticed how a lot of people are saying BLM now? Now, I know if you look on the Black Lives Matter website, they say BLM as well, but they're Black Lives Matter. But a lot of people almost try to turn it into something else. It's like, oh, HR, D&I, BLM. It's just another business acronym that we can ignore, which is like, I tend to say Black Lives Matter. But whenever I've asked anyone who's talked about Black Lives Matter, anyone corporate, I'll say, have you been on their website? Do you know what they want? Do you know what they stand for? Most people haven't even been on their website. Most people have got no idea.
They've been there before George Floyd, which a lot of people don't know that. They kind of say George Floyd, Black Lives Matter go together, but they've been there for many years before that, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's
But even if you didn't know about them before that, that's fine. But if you represent an organization and let's say you're head of diversity and inclusion, or you work in inclusion, or you're saying that we're anti-racist and we support Black Lives Matter. Like, have you been on their website? Most people haven't. And by the way, if you go on their website, they are so articulate. It's unbelievable.
I get their news, their weekly, not weekly, their newsletter feeds, and talking about what we're continuing to do, and the whole raising awareness and that continual work that needs to be done. We can't just stop and go, yes, I've done my part, and okay, now I'm anti-racist, as you say. It's like it's a continual effort, I think, when you talk about overcoming racism. And I think it's great that we've come as far as we have, but at the same time, I feel like there's so much more left. In a way, it feels I'm like with Kamala Harris, I'm like, great, first Black and Asian vice president, but we're 2021. How is she still the first? How are we still talking about the first in 2021? But anyway, that kind of brings me to...
Sorry, I was going to say, to me, that doesn't surprise me. When you think about racism as a system of advantage, and it explains why it's taken so long, because as a system, it's designed to create advantages and benefits for particular groups of people, right?
That's very true.
So this is the challenge. Also, I want to qualify my previous point about I said, Black Lives Matter on their website, they're so articulate, it's unbelievable. Actually, it's completely believable. You know, the intellect required and the commitment there, it's unbelievable compared to the people who are citing them. The distance in the knowledge and expertise and experience is what I meant to say. I just wanted to clarify that, because when anyone says to me, oh, have you got an idea of what's a good idea to think about this stuff? I always say, have you been on the Black Lives Matter website? Because they've really thought about it.
Yeah.
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 I think
So
that brings me, sure. That kind of brings us to one of our next questions is, whether in your opinion, do you think that we can talk about diversity and inclusion without being political at all? Or does creating change mean that we can can we create that change without including politics into it at all?
I would say it depends what you mean by politics. Are we talking like party politics, or is it more sort of the abstract concept?
So more of the abstract, so it's not like a Tory, Labour, blue, red state kind of thing, but more about if you think about people who are creating change at the policy makers, if you like, from a government perspective. So, or without bringing kind of, I don't know, kind of like provoking the whole concept of politics. So, for example, when we talk about creating change from a systematic level and what that looks like, can we talk about diversity and inclusion without it being a systematic problem?
Yeah, so to answer your question then, when I think of, if you're concerned about diversity and inclusion and you want to create change, and you said very specifically as well, systemic change, changing the system, the way things are, that is by its nature political. We're talking about human beings, their rights, their life chances. And so to flip it another way, if that isn't political, then what is? Because we're talking about discrimination, right? We're talking about opportunity. Most of the time I'm talking about the workplace, but the way we define inclusion is it's a systematic business approach, or a strategy that allows everyone to reach their potential. So everyone can perform, everyone can belong, everyone can reach their potential. If that's the case, number one, we don't have that now. In order to create that, a lot of things are going to have to change. And certain structures, policies, ways of thinking and acting will need to change. So I think by its nature, those things are political. Now, this becomes dangerous, right? Because people start saying, oh, now I don't want to get political. I suppose it depends on people's understanding of that term. What I'm not trying to say is this party means this or that party means that. That's not what I mean. A great example that I discussed towards the end of last year was about critical race theory. So you hear people talking about critical race theory, and in particular, it was discussed in the British Parliament, and there was an MP who was saying critical race theory shouldn't be taught in schools. It shouldn't be taught in schools as fact. And I agree, nothing should be taught in schools as fact, because the nature of knowledge means the one thing we know is that we never know enough, right? And things that we think are true, we later discover are not true. But we need an approach, a tried and tested approach. And so this idea of critical race theory, so it's very much against critical race theory being discussed. And I was thinking, but of course you are, because any critical theory, regardless of what that looks like, is anti-establishment. It wants to undermine the status quo. So if you've got an MP who is an agent of the system and the status quo, of course they are going to be opposed to any critical theory, because it seeks to change or undermine or challenge their power. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we're going to come across that. We're going to come across people, whoever's benefiting from the status quo is going to be resistant to any change that undermines that.
Yes, and it's very much, I think those concepts were very much brought up with Martin Luther King Day as well. Kind of how the way you remember him, and how he was portrayed on social media, all the quotes where that he said that were beautiful quotes, but they weren't necessarily depicting what he was fighting for and the political side of the systemic, changes and white privilege was omitted. So you celebrated the day, his anniversary, but you're not celebrating his message, and that's the biggest difference, right? And you just putting the black square or acting and doing things about it, being anti-racist, as Ibram X is saying, right? Those are the nuances between a leader who's doing something and a leader who's not doing something. It's all about, so being political, I think it means understanding that it's systemic. You can't, like you said, you can't tackle this issue without talking about those privileges and having to revolt against, certain things that haven't changed. And kind of, I was reading an article of an economist, actually Green, I don't remember his first name, but he was talking about this particular concept also of when you celebrate history and you talk about slavery, etc., we forget all the radicals that were against slavery, and we need to learn from that, and just have a conversation and changing who we are celebrating, how we're celebrating them, and why we're celebrating them. Not just the nice sentences and stuff like that, but kind of thinking about this nuance.
I think that's a really great point there, Tanya, because if you think about how the mainstream media or mainstream society talks about Dr. Martin Luther King today, it's quite nostalgic and, wow, what an incredible person. If you imagine reading the paper or speaking to people on an everyday basis, what was being said about him at the time, it's quite different. What the mainstream person or individual would be thinking, it wasn't this nostalgic, oh wow, what an incredible person, we need to get behind it. It's quite different, and this is a matter of public record. This isn't my opinion. Anyone can go and see what the newspapers were saying, what the TV was saying at the time. So yeah, you're right. It's this revisionist history almost, isn't it? We're going to change the way we thought of it. And with that in mind, we should probably be quite concerned about what's being said about Black Lives Matter, diversity and inclusion now. Because in the mainstream, yes, some of those words have moved into the mainstream, but people like myself, been here for a while talking about this. A lot of people have been ignoring it for a very long time. In 20 years, is everybody going to be talking about diversity and inclusion? Yeah, it's such this obvious thing. We can't believe people were against it. We can't believe, you can imagine it, right? It's such an obvious thing. Of course, your pronouns, no one should care. Of course, race, we're all anti-racist.
Of course, Black Lives Matter, and we don't have to justify that statement by going all lives matter. And it's like, oh, please stop. It's like, just to justify the statement, and as you're saying, we'll be looking back going, wow, they have to justify that their lives matter, which
so true. I did a whole podcast on Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, just to address that point.
Exactly, I was going to say, to the audience, listen to Jonathan's podcast, because even you talk about white privilege, how the misconception of white privilege and how people misinterpret it, and some books talk about it in a certain way versus another. But I think we could talk to you the whole day, and you're a very busy man, okay? So in the interest of your time and to just go to the fire questions that we love so much, that Anne will ask you.
What's this, a quick fire section?
Yes.
But we won't make it too quick.
Let's see if I can handle it. Okay.
So we do this with our guests just to get them to know them a little bit more, and to help share a little bit more about what their little tips and quotes and so on. So the first one is, who are you currently listening to or following that you'd highly recommend others to also listen to or follow?
That's a really good question. I didn't expect that. I listen to loads of. Who am I listening to? Ooh, I'm not sure. Who am I listening to? I'm not really listening to anything.
Following? It could be like someone you think is really inspiring on social media.
Okay, I'll tell you someone who I think. I'll tell you someone who I think everybody should listen to, who probably don't or they've never heard of, is someone called Cal Newport. Okay. So Cal Newport, and this is for career advice, right? Okay. He talks about, people say you should follow your passion, because a lot of people contact me, I want to get into diversity and inclusion, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And what he says and what I say based on him is you should develop rare and valuable skills. So he's got a book and it's called So Good They Can't Ignore You. So Cal Newport he's someone who you should follow and you should investigate. Absolutely. He gives really great career advice, which I followed myself. And whenever anyone asks me for career advice, I say, buy this book, read that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And we'll put the details as well at the bottom of this so that people can will have that to hand. So the second question is, what's your favorite quote?
Got so many. My favorite quote. Okay, I'll tell you a quote that means a lot to me now. Okay. Is live like no one else so you can live like no one else.
Oh, I like that.
So that's one. I've got so many quotes. I collect them and I focus on them a lot. But that's one I've been thinking about. I've been reading a little bit about Stoicism, actually. And who was it? I can't remember, but Ryan Holiday. That's probably another person we should follow. He talks about Stoicism. He's got something called the Daily Stoic, and he says something that's I can't remember the name of the philosopher who says it, but it may even be Marcus Aurelius. But we need to focus on what's up to us and not be concerned about what's not up to us. So focus on the things that are within our control.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Just one last question on a lighter note. Once this lockdown is over, where are you planning to travel to? Like, what's your favorite destination that you've got in mind past lockdown?
That's an easy one for me. I love Brazil. I love Brazil. December 2019, New Year's Eve, 2019, I was in Rio on the beach with 2 million other people watching the fireworks. Everyone was dressed in white. I love Brazil. I absolutely love it. I used to live there for a bit. I would love to get back there.
Amazing.
For making us travel. This is fantastic. Thank you again today. We wanna tell the audience how they can connect with you. And can you share with us where is the best way for them to connect with you?
So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So you can find me, Dr. Jonathan Ashong-Lamptey, but the best place is probably the website, which is the Element of Inclusion, all normal English, elementofinclusion.com.
We'll put all the links.
Podcast.
Yeah. For the podcast, the links to the podcast and the book club as well.
That's right.
Which is great. You learn a lot from all of this. So we want to thank you, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for listening. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter so you get the news on our episodes and the notes as well. And we look forward to speaking again, Jonathan, soon.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Once again, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye.
Bye.